Welcome to the Recommended Daily Value Podcast, your daily dose into the health and wellness world.
Welcome back to the Recommended Daily Value Podcast, where we dive into everything health, fitness, and nutrition related 5 days a week in 5 minutes or less. This podcast is brought to you by Umzu, and I'm your host, Tyler Woodward. Make sure to hit that subscribe button because today we're reviewing Nutrient Power by William J. Walsh, PhD. If you're just getting into nutrition or want someone to realize the power nutrition has on our body, I highly recommend this book. In the book, Walsh presents, and I quote, a science-based nutrient therapy system that can help millions of people diagnosed with mental disorders, including conditions such as ADHD, autism, depression, schizophrenia, and Alzheimer's disease. Before we dive into the book, I want to give you all a bit of a preface on the science behind it. When it comes to metabolism in general, but specifically the creation and breakdown of various hormones, everything has a cost. You might imagine this like a budget. So for instance, if you decide to move into a much nicer place, which costs twice as much, you'll have half your budget to spend on food, clothes, and other essentials. The same sort of thing applies to biology. For example, the synthesis of dopamine requires the amino acid tyrosine, and the enzyme that runs it requires copper and B6. Let's say you're not producing enough dopamine, it could be a result of not having enough copper, B6, and tyrosine to complete this process. On the other hand, if your body is producing too much dopamine for whatever reason, you're going to have a higher requirement for copper, B6, and tyrosine, so you'll need more from your diet. And maybe this excess dopamine production is pulling those nutrients from other vital processes, resulting in, let's pretend, not enough adrenaline being produced, for example, all of which can have an effect on your biology and your chemistry in your brain. Walsh states in the chapter called The Power of Nutrients, an underappreciated fact is that the primary raw materials for the synthesis of many neurotransmitters are nutrients, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and other natural biochemicals that we obtain from food. Serotonin is produced from the amino acid tryptophan, a constituent of protein, and the final reaction step requires vitamin B6 as a cofactor. Dopamine can originate from either of two amino acids, with iron and folate also involved in the process. Norepinephrine is produced from dopamine, with copper having a decisive role. There are numerous other examples of the decisive role of nutrients in neurotransmitter synthesis. In the book, Walsh goes into some of the basics of neurotransmitters, hormones, and all that good stuff, which we're not going to go into for the purpose of this 5-minute episode. Basically, Walsh's method consisted of collecting blood and urine samples from about 30,000 patients who he worked with who suffered from various mental health conditions, including schizophrenia, depression, autism, ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, Alzheimer's disease, the list goes on. Then he was able to classify these conditions based on the observations he collected from their blood tests. In his findings, he found that the quote-unquote repeat offenders were copper overload, vitamin B6 deficiency, zinc deficiency, methyl or folate imbalances, oxidative stress overload, and amino acid imbalances. Then he would organize the diseases in relation to these various chemical classifications or phenotypes of the quote-unquote epigenetic expression of the various disorders. For instance, Walsh found in his tests of 3,600 schizophrenia patients, 42% were overmethylators, 28% were undermethylators, 20% exhibited severe oxidative stress or pyroli disorder, 4% had gluten intolerance, and the other 6% had various other conditions. Then he reported specific observations for each classification or phenotype, meaning, for instance, he recorded the lab values, symptoms, and traits associated with overmethylated schizophrenics, and then compare these to the other classifications like undermethylated or oxidative stress schizophrenics. Then he walks you through a number of case studies related to each phenotype. If you're not aware, case study is like a walkthrough of the observations and treatment protocol and results from a single patient. Then he discusses the various theories associated with the cause of each disease and walks you through his protocol for treating each type. This was a very brief summary of his process, so I hope it helps and interests you to go check out the work for yourself. What I personally found extremely interesting in the book is his alternative approach to mental health. Typically, all you hear about when it comes to mental health are things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think can be very useful and powerful, but it neglects the metabolic side of things. Many mental health conditions may be in your head, but they are very real and have very real metabolic consequences, which can be caused by nutrient deficiencies, heavy metal toxicities, environmental pollutants, the list goes on. I don't understand why we would completely focus on one curative approach while neglecting the other, when likely they would both work best together. And while I don't inherently agree with everything Walsh does, I do really appreciate his approach to nutrition and to mental health. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button and to share it with a friend. And remember, these opinions are my own based on my own research and experiences and is not medical advice. Until next time, be good.